He is a software developer, but he works on the Allen Telescope Array, and he is also the person behind the SETI Live project, which you may have seen talked about in the Citizen Science earlier, which ties together data gathering and analysis from the ATA in a cloud infrastructure and allowing the citizens to participate. Next we have Jonathan Fay. Jonathan is a software developer and also a passionate amateur astronomer. He develops software for astronomy, imaging, and visualization, and he's the principal software architect for the Worldwide Telescope at Microsoft Research. And finally we have Chris Ford. Chris is the business director for RenderMan at Pixar Animation and has been working for over 20 years in computer graphics, software development, and media productions technology. I also know that he's an avid astrophotographer, and if you ever have the chance to see him give a full-length presentation on some of his astrophotography, it's quite fascinating. My name is Rob French. I'm a researcher at the SETI Institute, and I'll be your moderator today, and we can go ahead and start with John Richards.
Okay. So my little spiel here is about why don't we have any SETI games? Okay, so SETI is a great learning opportunity for young and old alike, and there's a lot of mobile devices out there, and there's a lot of games. And my argument is that the NBA has games. I got online, the $6 games. They probably sell millions of them, and so does NASCAR. But why don't we have any SETI-related games? To me, SETI is much more interesting than NBA or NASCAR. That's just my own opinion. And what we should probably have one. Start addressing this market space. So I was thinking about starting to do a mobile game, the very simplest, to get my feet wet, and maybe get some people at the SETI Institute interested in carrying this further. So I was thinking of maybe for little kids or maybe young teenagers, and start off with our problem that we're trying to address. We have space to deal with, and we're Earth. We're sitting here, and in space, and there might be somebody else out there, some other planet, and on that other planet, they may be having a transmitter that is transmitting signals that we can receive. And on Earth, we should be receiving if we can. And logically, you would think, well, if that's all set up properly, the signal will go from one to the other, and voila. But no, there's a problem. There's a lot of stuff in the way. There's asteroids, there's interstellar medium, there's the distance to deal with. And once it reaches Earth, there's going to be problems with satellites and all the radio frequency interference that we're dealing with here on Earth. So I think there's a good opportunity to create a fun game where you try to shoot, the signal over, and you have all these things that a real signal would try to go through, and you have to navigate your way through to get to the ATA and successfully see a signal. So I'm just thinking about this idea. I'm drawing out the storyboards for it, and what I'm trying to do is to figure out what's best, to make it kind of nice and simple and cartoony like this, or should I get into, I've been trying to develop with Unity 3D, and I've started to develop the 3D space, and I'm going to try to do a simple comparison to see what would look nicer for such an app. Would it be the cartoony look, or like that, or would it be something where you're moving around in 3D space with real planets running around? So that's where I'm at. I'm just in the beginning stages. If anybody's got any ideas, any comments, I very much appreciate hearing about your ideas.
Okay, my name is Gabriel. I also work at the SETI Institute. Well, you already know that. I'm normally a web designer, and John and I started talking about this issue about games and how to draw more people into what the SETI Institute does. And pretty soon it became sort of an informal Wednesday morning meeting, and we'd start throwing a bunch of ideas at the board and see what stuck. My approach is a little bit different, and I'm trying to do something for the tablet. But for me, and I don't know if you, Rob, and John have encountered this, when people find out I work at the Institute, I usually get asked one of two questions. Number one, have you found anything? Number two, why not? Number 3.
No, number 1 is always, we know you found it, where are you hiding it?
Well, that would be number 3, is when are you going to show us what's in the basement? But if I were to make something, a game based around that, it'd be a very short game. Because we don't have a basement. And if we did, it'd be filled with old letterhead. So, let's see, use this. I'll start here. So, essentially, it's going to be less hard science and more about the process that is behind the science of what SETI is all about. The mock-up that I have here, I'm doing some A/B testing on this right now, as well as some wireframes. You would start out with a panorama of known stars. So I apologize if you don't see any constellations you recognize there. And when you click on one of those, on any of those, you would get an alert box. There we go. With the name of the star, distance in light years, and the type of message that you want to send out. So there are 2 types of messages. One is a greeting, basically how you doing? And the other one is what I'm calling a knowledge. Now, a knowledge is any item from 4 categories that will clue in an alien civilization to the current state of our technology and of our culture. Right here I have, you see the mock-up there, basically sending nuclear fission. And that's going to go out to 61 Cygni, which is 11 light years away. And this is important. You'll see why soon. The knowledge categories, and sorry for butchering the English language, but I'm calling these knowledges. The 4 categories are science, engineering, philosophy, and culture. And there would be, I'm thinking about 25 under each category to start with. Science, you would have things such as the Human Genome Project, nuclear fission, bioengineering, that kind of thing. And the engineering, orbital mechanics, solar energy, the internet. Philosophy would have general philosophy type of thing, religion, rationalism, political science, culture, poetry, theater, sculpture. The beginning of the game is really the building phase here. So there's really not a lot that's going to start happening right away. You're going to be sending a lot of messages, and you're going to be sitting around waiting for some of these to come back, if any. Replies, as far as from an alien civilization, would be relatively rare, but not too rare in game terms as to make the game unplayable. Right now, I'm thinking something around 50 to 100 turns. You would get a reply from an alien intelligence. Or you would get a prompt from the computer that would say there's been no reply. Would you like to try again? Since we don't have a telephone, we can call up and say, operator, hook me up with Alpha Centauri, and sorry, nobody's there. Okay, I'll leave a message. I think this is the next best thing. Light years are important because the speed of light, a light year in game terms will be measured in turns or fractions of a turn. So for example, if 61 Cygni is 11 light years away, which it is, it will take 22 turns for a reply to come back. Or a prompt from the computer, if in this case there's no reply. Would you like to try again? Yes, I would. I'll send a greeting. So let's say after 50 turns, or after you've been playing this for however long, you start getting some replies back. What would a reply from an alien civilization look like? Well, essentially, look similar to what we've sent. And these I'm calling advanced knowledges. So for the sake of the game, we're going to assume that aliens are more advanced than we are. Because I don't want to get into all kinds of things. So the greeting would be, hey, what's going on? Or knowledges would be science, weather control, synthetic life, teleportation, engineering, picotechnology, the Dyson sphere, the Matryoshka brain, philosophy, one world, mind harnessing, or machine rights. Culture, Mos Eisley Cantina music, because I just couldn't think of anything else better right now. Or Mos Eisley Cantina sculpture, Mos Eisley dance. You like that? So yeah, these are the same 4 categories. And here's the thing. After a certain amount of time, you start collecting all these advanced technologies, all these knowledges. When a predetermined set of advanced knowledge is collected under any one of the 4 categories, a key knowledge is unlocked. Now, the key knowledge represents a major milestone in the advancement of our civilization. So, under science, you'd have end of disease. Under philosophy, end of poverty. Engineering, end of pollution. Culture, end of war. Achieving all 4 key knowledges unlocks the equilibrium, which is essentially the ability to avoid self-destruction. Call me an old hippie. What can I say? You win, we win, everybody wins. There's another kicker. Here we go. And it's a built-in time bomb here. Global disasters are the flip side of the key knowledges. And they're the same 4 categories of science, but engineering, philosophy, and culture. But in this case, you'd have a pandemic, runaway pollution, famine, and war. Disasters start out at, thinking right now, 50 on a chart of 0 to 100. Every X amount of turns, they advance 1 notch unless an advanced knowledge is received or developed by your team of adepts. I only have about 5 minutes here. I'm not going to get into the team of adepts, but we have one. And if an advanced knowledge is acquired under, for example, engineering, pollution drops by 5 notches. If all 4 reach 100, the game is over. If a key knowledge is developed, remember, key knowledge is when you collect a predetermined set of the advanced knowledges, then the global disaster category drops to 0, and you're good to go on that one. Now you got to worry about the other 3. That's pretty much the gist of it right here. Because of the time allotted here, I can't get into, like I said, the team of adepts. There's also funding, and it's also the natural question of what would happen if you encounter an aggressive civilization. Let's just say this would not be a shoot 'em up game. I'm trying to avoid that. But there would be some questions to be answered, and I've yet to meet with a couple of people at the Institute that I'd like to discuss some of this with to get some more ideas. All right?
Yep. Can you tilt the laptop a little bit so I can see once the slideshow without?
Yeah, once I find your...
Oh, okay.
It's you?
Nope. Well, that's the old one.
It's the old one?
We want the JFA game one. That's from the last. Oh, yeah, there we go. That was it.
Yeah, right?
Okay. So I'm here to talk about encountering the hostiles. So we had a great speaker at the Astroviz conference in Seattle last year who, as we were talking about the topic of bringing together visualization of astronomy, we brought in the video game creators from Halo. And they gave us a little bit of presentation. I brought, since we had to bring slides on something, this was something that I thought would be cool to kind of share. But looking at, what is our encounter going to look like when, we look at other civilizations? And their kind of view of it is they come and kick our ass. And we have to fight back. But in all this environment, they try to bring the realism in terms of at least where it doesn't make sense to break the rules. Obviously, for a storytelling purpose in a game, if you just stick to the science, then people have to. It's sort of like in Flight Simulator. If you want to fly, from New York to Seattle. In a flight simulator, unless you can speed time up, it's going to take a very long time, and it will end up being a very boring game. So sometimes you want to say, let's just skip forward, on autopilot until we get to the landing phase. Well, in a game too, is being able to have faster than light travel, other types of devices that enable you to sort of break the accepted rules of physics. But when it comes down to getting into the gameplay of this, you want to be able to create an environment that's going to be both fun, but unless it's to add to the concept of being funner and more enjoyable, trying to keep to something that looks, consistent with reality, or at least consistent with a view of reality that doesn't really fly in the face of real science concepts. And it was kind of cool to see these folks who didn't necessarily have, science advisors on staff, how they really kind of looked into what it took to really create this universe where they could tell their story and could have this engaging gameplay, but try to get inspired by some of the work that was done by people at Hubble and other types of these stunning images that we see, and sort of recreate that in the video game. And I think this is feedback between the science that's given to us in movies and video games, or the spatial environments and things like that, along with the type of engagement that people in public outreach, especially in the Great Observatories program, who have tried to really create images that will impact people and really kind of show the science behind it. And so I think that sort of feedback loop of getting the two involved will mean that we'll hopefully have a more aware culture, so that when you have shockingly stupid rules of physics being broken, that people will object to it. And I think that's certainly a lot more true now than it has been in times past. But anyway, we can see some of these images that were created for their environment, and they looked at how they had to build this universe with plausible planets and plausible space stations, and then of course that's what ends up happening in the end. It doesn't work out so well. So we should maybe listen to Hawking a little bit about, this is what they're going to do to us once we make contact. So, or this is a plausible alternative. So it's more the dystopian view of your pleasant game. But
Great.
Just grab my slides. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. What I want to do actually is take a rather longer-term view here. For about the past 20 years or so, I've been involved with the development of the software tools that are used to actually create games and also movie special effects. And games and movies have often been kind of two separate disciplines. When you're producing the visuals for a film, essentially it's a kind of a brute force and ignorance approach. You need more processing capacity, just go and buy more computers and throw it at it. With a game or any kind of interactive device, normally you need to essentially work within the limits of that device, which are normally governed by the number of polygons and textures, for example, that device will move around at any one time. But the reality is that the public's expectations, certainly as far as visual quality is concerned, is pretty much set by feature films. So that even though, characters like Buzz Lightyear, for example, or WALL-E would actually be very simple to implement inside a game because they're pretty straightforward geometrically and in terms of the textures. Certainly now, and the shading is not complicated. Really what the public really expects is something like this, right? Which is, you probably recognize two shots from Prometheus, where we have the famous spaceship and that kind of level of visual fidelity. And so in thinking about this particular session, what really interests me is the boundary, if you like, between linear narrative, which is represented by a feature film, and game, play, which essentially is the ability to interact with a environment or with characters, and of course have certain things happen according to whatever it is you happen to do or whatever action you actually take. So there are a number of developments occurring that are really narrowing that boundary between the cinematic level of quality that most of you really want to see in the movie theater and the ability to actually interact with that. Cinematic quality imagery is always a little bit ahead of game quality imagery, but it's, that's, the is it good enough level continues to kind of get closer, I think, certainly as far as games are concerned. Now, you can deal with several types of imagery. You can deal with kind of like stylized imagery of the sort we have here, which, some of our movies, which involve either surfaced objects like spaceships or stochastic or random type effects, the particle effects, and, as you see here in the sun. Or you can deal with the photorealistic imagery, which I showed earlier. I'm going to kind of skip a slide here. But what I really wanted to kind of touch upon is that the use of high fidelity imagery for visualization or for the use of entertainment is really converged. They use the same technology. It's just how it is deployed that has really changed. And I come back to the public's expectations. I'm going to take the long-term view here. I said I've been doing this for about 20 years. look 20 years ago, what tools did we have to make games? You know, simple little polygon generation tools. You know, it was the same for feature films. You know, the amount of progress has been enormous in that period of time. The reality is that over the next 20 years, we can see massive improvements as well. And here's an interesting fact. You know, I'm going to touch upon a point here which Jonathan raised, you know, about when the aliens finally find us, they're going to come and stomp all over us. Well, let me just challenge that notion. You know, the reality is that the advance in visualization technology and the ability to simulate environments is advancing far more rapidly than space technology. You know, bound as it is by government budgets and just by the physical constraints of that medium. And another simple reality is that bandwidth is cheaper than rocket fuel. So let me just question the notion. You know, maybe our future as far as interaction with other cultures, other civilizations, may well actually be not a physical one, but it may actually be an interactive one. Because we can already see that the level of visual and experiential technology that we have at the moment and developments in immersivity are going to make this possible, you know, within the lifetimes of pretty much all of us here anyway. So kind of, you know, that's a kind of a long-term view. You know, we can talk about the individual tools and, you know, the technologies that are falling into place that will govern that. But I just really wanted to kind of bookend this discussion as far as visualizing science and as visualizing how we'd encounter other cultures with that kind of thought in your minds.
Well, I'm going to ask the first question here of the SETI folks. Have we considered partnering with any of the current extremely successful game manufacturers so that we have things like SETIville on Facebook or Angry Birds Aliens?
No, but we'd like to.
We have Angry Birds Space they came out with. That was the first step.
Yeah. No, I think that would be, you know, I've suggested trying to get our foot in the door at a place like Electronic Arts. You know, I think us being from SETI might impress them, that they might be able to do something that would be profitable for them, or it would at least be interesting to talk to them and see what their thoughts are.
Anybody in the audience from Electronic Arts?
No?
You're not from Electronic. There you go.
Sorry,
you guys
what?
talk afterwards. Excellent. Talk afterwards.
I've actually been in touch with a couple of people here at the conference, a couple of companies, and they will be unnamed so as not to muddy the possible proceedings. But there's been some interest. So hopefully at some point as the game progresses and gets developed a little further, there'll be more interest from others.
Okay, let's go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience. We have a roving microphone here.
So one of the questions, I guess I would ask this of Chris Ford first. I love the games, but what I find is that there's so much emphasis on the graphics that sometimes the playability loses out. So I happen to be one of those who loves Skyrim and loves Oblivion, where you've got this, if you see a flower pot, you can pick it up, as opposed to the very linear games. Do you see a direction for more interactivity, or do you see that they're going to be more the linear just because the demand is for fancy graphics?
Well, I think, you know, in my mind, you know, we have, 5 senses? And the visual sense is just one of them. And, you know, sound is another, of course, and hearing. And I haven't played any smelly games recently, and I certainly haven't tasted any. But, you know, reality is that the immersive experience is really one that should emphasize all elements of engagement with the game environment in which you're at. So I kind of view the current state of the art in games as actually fairly biased and one-sided, you know, based as it is on the demands of a certain section of the demographic, who generally like to blow things away with huge guns. So, no, I think, you know, to me, in my mind, immersivity and the technologies in immersion are really key to producing the type of experience I think you're after.
Well,
Right.
I hate to bring up that I think Infocom actually produced a smell factor in Leather Goddesses of Phobos. But I don't know if that turned out well or not.
Leather goddesses of Phobos.
Yes.
That brings back memories.
Yeah, that does.
What's that?
That's old. I guess.
All right, so sort of a question in dealing with some of these initial ideas. You've really sort of focused in on the sort of major perception of SETI. Have you thought or been thinking at all about some of these other areas that SETI is also involved with that would play into things like an interactive environment in terms of maybe exploring extremophiles on, these other, moons and planets and these different directions that you can take sort of these divisions?
Yeah, I actually have. And if this takes off like I hope it does, so to at least have a finished product that is reasonably playable, I would like to explore something along the lines of biology. Actually, that was my next thought. Something that again, not specifically hard science, but I find that there's a big disconnect between the public and what we do here at SETI. And we're not just about shooting out or listening for signals out in space, but there are also geologists, biologists, linguists, and how do we tap into that? How do make the public more familiar? A lot of you that are here already know what we do. Most of you do, but go talk to somebody out in the street and say, hey, yeah, you guys are. No, that's not us.
This question is sort of directed to Gabriel and John, since you guys were talking about making some sort of SETI game. I play a lot of really long-term games, and they get pretty boring after a while if you're just doing that one thing over and over. So have you thought of adding some sort of a waveform analysis minigame or a research minigame while you're waiting for your signals to come back?
Yes, this is a lot of the stuff I really couldn't get into, and this is kind of written. I went on vacation for a couple of weeks, and this is where a lot of this started germinating. And I had a lot of downtime, so there's a lot of notes on the margins of my notebook, including what you mentioned. And one of the options I thought of was making the messages that come back not automatically unlockable, but involving some sort of a difficulty level where you have to solve the puzzle. And maybe something as easy just as a visual puzzle and going all the way up to maybe PhD level calculus. I mean, it's just thinking out loud here, and people really want to challenge themselves, or maybe helping solve a language. That's something else that I wanted to speak with Doug Vakoch about. If any of you have sat in on any of his talks this weekend, he's a linguist. By the way, I think he has the coolest title on earth. What is it?
Director of Interstellar Message Composition.
Director, God, I love that. Nobody told me about this in career counseling. You can be a director of interstellar message composition. I would have signed up for this. So this is something I'd like to speak with him about, and I spoke with him briefly about it, and wanted to know how would these messages arrive, in what form, how would they be unlockable, how do we understand them? So that's the kind of stuff. What I presented here is just a basic bare bones, but that's the kind of stuff that I really want to tap into, because there are a lot of people that are really interested in the minutiae of that kind of work.
Another thing we can tie into these games is the Allen Telescope Array. We have live feeds that come from it and tell us what it's looking at any moment. We're looking usually at 3 objects in the sky at one time, and we're getting back signals. Well, most of them are radio frequency interference, but at least we get some pretty signals back from these continually, and it'd be easy to make a game, any game, tie into that feed and use those as real-time input.
When you're talking about the sort of long-term thing, going back to any sort of game creation, if you want to have a successful game that people are going to want to play, and you want to make it work for the long term, you have to be able to engage people fairly quickly that they can learn the environment, not get frustrated, that it's not too difficult to learn, and that there's a certain amount of basic control that you can master. But then you need to have a long-term story with reasonably manageable stages where you can continue to introduce people to new elements of the plot line, solving new problems, while keeping them engaged and interested. Because I think that if you come in and you just dump science on people and you don't give them something that they want to play, and or you give them something too hard or too easy or too laborious, then they'll lose interest in it. They won't really succeed. You want to trick them into learning the science that you're going to do because they're having so much fun, they don't realize they're learning. But everyone is going to be learning, and you just want to keep that balance of engagement and science content.
I'm sort of reminded of the movie Mercury Rising, where a major problem to solve was embedded as if it was a game. Nobody knew that they were solving an unsolved problem. So we could have the, crack the SETI code, but, have it on a totally different way of looking at it, so they don't know that's what they're trying to do. We had the gentleman down here.
Yeah, sorry. Well, there was a Stargate universe where the nerd gets to go off and explore the universe because he wins a game that's supposed to crack the alien code. I'm not sure you can offer that payoff in a puzzle game that you might have. But the idea that a game, an interactive game to compete with the NBA or NASCAR or something, but continuing on Angry Birds, and just that I became instantly addicted to Angry Birds, and I stopped when I got the 27 golden eggs and go, okay, that's enough. But that the underlying physics was actually accurate. That these were parabolic ballistic trajectories, that these materials were limited, but they had actual, tensile strength, and the trajectory birds, although they did seem to be little, jihadist suicide bombers, that they actually had mass, and they had velocity, and they had this. And of course, the underlying theme, of that these poor pigs have been stealing eggs, and these suicidal birds are attacking them. That seems sort of visceral and a war kind of a message. But that the fundamental satisfaction that I got, in physics and such, was that it was, rather than if you gain so many points, then this happens, it was that you actually have a physical object that has a trajectory that interacts in a predictable way. And then, of course, the playability of it, that you can keep coming back and playing these things again and increasing your skill. And it's not as expensive as golf, and it doesn't take as much real estate. But that the moving forward into a game that would engage not the actual process of investigating extraterrestrial intelligence, but that the reason you might be interested in knowing the aliens or what kind of environment they have, or exploring space, something like that. So a game on the level of Angry Birds, perhaps in 3D on a larger scale, where you're using actual orbital mechanics. Maybe you've got spacecraft with a limited delta V or something, maybe with a SpaceX logo on the side of it going against a Dream Chaser or some other craft. But that the idea that the game itself has a physical reality to it that's limited, and that you can, as you're playing the game, get a sense that you are actually getting a skill that you're developing, that perhaps you could then compete against other people in a web-based game. But the fundamental idea of Angry Birds is that it is simulating a physical reality that you can see.
Perhaps if I could just add a point. Just one point for those in the audience who are not aware, that the whole area of simulating physics inside of a game, essentially in a physics engine, it's a well understood subdiscipline, if you like, in games tool development. So there's absolutely every reason why real physics should apply to trajectories and to the way objects move in the game. And even in the area of image fidelity, the move to physically accurate as opposed to cheated imagery is a current ongoing area of development. So there's less creativity, if you like, and more real physics in the code. Not everyone kind of realizes that, because cheating is how it's often done to date. But certainly, I would expect to see more real science in the underlying mechanisms behind the games as we go forwards.
One of the funnest videos I ever saw, going back to Halo franchise, the original one, there was a guy who was doing video capture of doing physics experiments using grenades and a warthog and blowing it like over an arch and stuff. And it was absolutely hilarious because he was using the physics engines to do all these experiments to see how he could just time everything right to get all the sequences in. And the video was mind-blowing. I think it's still probably hanging around. But I think that sort of thing, that the guy probably never figured out he was being a scientist because he was having so much fun doing it. But that's what he was doing. He was learning about the physical principles of that universe and having that good fidelity and obeying those rules and allowing you to experiment and learn new things. It's teaching you sort of the scientific principles.
Back here, maybe you've covered this because I didn't hear the whole panel discussion, but what about, we just had the citizen science panel, what about the idea of making the development of a game or games a citizen science project itself? So you make it sort of a crowdsourcing and let it evolve, or let games, many games be developed, but as a citizen science project, and then they use those games. So that's just, I don't know if you covered that. But
that would be, correct me if I'm wrong, gamification. So you'd be playing a game, but the underlying reason for the game is to solve a scientific problem. We looked into that last year, and to tell you the truth, we had this little competition on gamification.com. Had to have somebody come up with an idea that we could use gamification to help us look at our data, and we didn't really get any good ideas, except most people's idea was, let's do something, shoot 'em up in space. That was probably, 80%. And then another guy the guy that actually won the small competition, his game was like Tetris. You remember Tetris, where
Yep.
the little geometric shapes come down, you got to fit them all together. Well, this would be the waterfall images, as you may have seen in the SETI Live that I was showing, the static looking images. Well, they would come down in blocks, and you would have to, as soon as you saw something, you'd see, I see something, you get points, that kind of thing.
Well, I wasn't necessarily referring to specifically addressing a scientific problem, but allowing them to use for games, whether they're games of shoot 'em up or games of exploration, or how you would use the data to make an interesting game. It could be actually trying to use them to solve a problem, but it could be just a way
Just
to
use
invite
the
them
data. Yeah.
to use their imaginations and develop a collaborative game. It would just be another outreach mechanism. Anyway.
That's the challenge, yeah.
There's been some pretty interesting, not necessarily making games, but the sort of puzzle-solving problems in the protein folding, and being able to crowdsource that, because people who get into it really, they do a better job than the computers can, and actually feel kind of challenged in terms of doing that, and so it almost becomes like a game for them. But it'd be kind of interesting from a signal processing standpoint if that could be
Well,
utilized.
we need to, it would, looking at the signals like I was showing in the SETILive.org, make it really interesting, like game, sort of. Even if it was minimal, if it kept you going because you got a game going on, that'd be a good simple game if you could figure out the trick of how to do it, what to do, not how to do it, but how to make it appealing enough to seem like a game, but then it's not really one.
Yeah, and Fold It was a few years ago, that I think Jonathan's referring to here, is figured it out. They nailed it. How do you take something abstract like a protein chain and turn it into a fun puzzle game? I've spent so many hours playing this thing, and I learned something. Oh no.
Okay, we accidentally skipped over the lady down here in the front row.
Well, for instance, RPGs, they usually have a pretty heavy underlying message, some kind of, just something that they want to take away. It's often, from your Zeldas to your Marios to Mass Effect, they all have something pretty heavy and just a message for you. I'm wondering if advance into more games, more like involving outer space and the things that we've been talking about, would the message necessarily become a little bit more ethical just because of the nature of space exploration? And would that make the audience trend towards an older audience rather than a younger?
I want to pass this one down. That's beyond my. That's a tough one. I think there's a lot of people at the Institute that spend a lot of time thinking about those sorts of things. It would be beyond the scope of a game like this. Even games like Mass Effect, I don't think they even touch on that too much. But it's a great question, and it would be a great topic to explore.
So I wanted to point out that Wikipedia has some great articles. One's on gamification. There's another one with serious games, and it has a list of a whole bunch of serious games for solving real problems. And so if anyone's interested in this, they can look at it. A friend of mine's working on something called Code Hero, where the object of the game is to learn how to program. You're familiar with it?
Okay. Yes.
And let's see. I was going to point out there was a science fiction game called Rama that was based on Asimov's Rama series of books that involves like going to a space station and interacting with alien life. But I was going to point out that there are a few other examples like MUDs or the early text-based MMORPGs. There are a few of those where a number of my programmer friends learned to program because after you reached a certain level you could program quests, monsters, and stuff like that in the game. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Somebody there.
This was actually one's a real quick suggestion for you. Don't underestimate how appealing the old screensaver that used to show up when they were using everybody's downtime to do SETI.
Oh, the SETI at home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying to try and make it do SETI at home, but if you're just looking for something to engage people, just having an idle screen of that, displays those pictures was actually, lots of people spent lots of time staring at that. And I guess the other one, I just throw it as a thought. You guys are focusing on the, decoding messages kind of aspect of the game. The other game that might actually appeal to people is the raise money for SETI, engage the public, more of a railroad baron kind of a view of a game, which is, keep SETI alive would be the game rather than discover alien intelligence.
Yeah, I touch a little bit on that on this game, the whole funding issue, because you can't walk around the Institute for 10 feet without somebody talking about funding and where is it going to come from. So yeah, that definitely has to play into that.
The screensaver, though, that's a good idea. Because you could have what's going on in the Allen Telescope Array at the moment. Yeah.
So to build on that concept, and I was just talking to my friend here, is that if you guys have ever heard of the game Civilization and with Atari, that opens up so many possibilities for the games that you guys are all discussing. From the fact that you can choose whether or not you're going to blow the other aliens up, or you're going to choose to build a civilization with them, build cultures, figure out what you're going to do with funding, and things of that nature. So you might consider expanding, Gabriel, on what you've been talking about and building it into 2D infrastructure. It's not going to be something that's that hard to build. But a turn-based RT, or even an RTS, real-time strategy game, would work really well that way and would open up a lot of subsets for you guys to look at, including exploration and science and building things like that.
Yeah,
nature.
I agree, and I'm a huge fan of the Civ series. I've been so since Civ 2, I think. I tried not to be influenced too much by that, but I think you can see a little bit of the flavor that's creeped into it. I'm trying to avoid also empire building, because frankly, we just don't have that kind of budget for that scope of a game like that. But another option that I was looking into was assigning, if you do a multiplayer game, assigning players to a different star system. And each player starts the game with a different advanced technology. And if you get something like 1,000, 2,000 players assigned to a small portion of the local group in our solar system, maybe, you can start finding each other. You can start contacting each other, and hey, I'll trade you Mos Eisley Cantina music for your, for your hovercraft or whatever, Yeah. Yes, yeah, I agree. They're great games, without a doubt.
All right, so in terms of physics simulations, there have, of course, been the series of the Incredible Machine games, where you're creating Rube Goldberg machines, and those have been relatively popular. But in terms of physics of the universe, have any of you had experience with the Universe Sandbox, which I've looked at, actually I've downloaded from Steam, but haven't had time to play with it. But it seems to be a physics simulator on universal scales in terms of star systems and galaxies, et cetera. And I thought that would be, at least that's one that's out there already, selling for $10 on Steam, that already does some of what we're talking about here.
Right, yeah, I've heard of it. I've not actually used it. But I think that the use of these physics simulators to kind of try out different scenarios is really quite entertaining. In a way, it's how we also simulate different scenarios for non-game type applications. When, for example, my background when making films, for example, the whole process of visualization, trying out does A, B, or C, or D work, is often done in a game type context. So, the same principle applies to astronomical and larger format visualization.
Yeah, the Universe Sandbox, the developer of that, displayed it at the AstroVis conference in Seattle last year, and it's a pretty fun program, just playing around with, watching what happens when you throw all these crazy physics together and just seeing what goes on. You can realistically model things if you want, but the idea of being able to sort of learn the limits of physics by kind of taking things to the extreme makes it a lot more fun, So sort of a David Letterman dropping pianos from buildings, approach to things, or killing pigs with birds, It appeals to that sort of wanton destruction that seems to drive game sales. Except you can do it at a universe level.
Did somebody else have the first mic? You have a mic, but where's the other mic? Okay, back there first.
Since you guys brought up Angry Birds also, I was thinking about how Angry Birds has that ability to, for a fixed price, if you're stuck on a level, you can actually skip it and come back to it at a later point. So you could bring in microtransactions, and that would be another vein of income for SETI.
That's a good idea.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Or hats. You could always use hats.
Hats.
So, we've had scientific illustrations for a very long time in natural science, and right now we're seeing some more things in video for representation of scientific concepts. And do you see, and these things work in the way of also adding on as an addendum to text or replacing some text? Do you see something like that going in either games or just interactive content in 3D that's replacing explanatory concepts in the forms of interaction and games?
Well, that's the kind of core of what Worldwide Telescope does, is being able to provide something that's a dynamic universe simulator, be able to where it's actually using real science data, real orbital information, being able to move time forward and backwards, plot data and everything like that. There's been a few people who've actually worked with curriculum in different books and with different companies. I don't specifically point out one over the other, but so there are some book publishers who have actually created sets of Worldwide Telescope tours to go along with the content. The other thing that has been used is Worldwide Telescope. While it's not a game, we try to bring game sensibilities to the environment in the EPO side of things, to be able to have people use, the 3D graphics, the realistic visualization and things like that to be able to come in and have fun with just exploring and have that visceral experience. But also in terms of teaching astronomy concepts. And in Boston, at Harvard Center for Astrophysics, Alyssa Goodman has created this program that they go out to schools and use the immersive worldwide telescope to teach astronomy concepts, and they've had phenomenal improvements in the how much fun the kids have with it, how interested they are. In fact, when they were displaying the slides at the American Astronomical Society meeting, someone in the audience said, well, looking at your slides and the numbers, an alternative to actually using something fun like Worldwide Telescope would be to not teach astronomy, because the effects of the current book system actually turns kids off from their interest is actually lower after going through the traditional curriculum than it was before. And many of the key questions, they actually performed worse after the traditional methods. And so they were saying, well, the alternative was not to. Well, I'm not going to recommend that by any means. But it is, using today's technology and this game technology to be able to teach that type of curriculum, I think is something that would, be great. I'd love to see, WWT is already doing that role to a certain extent, but I'd like to see it even more immersed into education.
Yeah, this is a really quite profound development. I mean, let's just kind of step back a bit. You're referring to essentially referencing information from a book or through traditional means that are essentially static and frozen in time once information is essentially baked out. In the type of environments, that Jonathan's referring to, information is fluid, it's updated all the time, dependent on, new research that comes in. And you have the time element as well, so time variable phenomena are all easily understood. And, to me, that's a big and profound way in the way we actually, innovation in the way we actually, can access what are really often quite complex descriptions of complex objects and phenomena.
I'm curious, a couple people have given you a lot of different suggestions for where you could take your game, but in my mind, the people who would want to play a Civilization-like game and the people who want to play a game with microtransactions are two very different people. And I was curious where you two think that the games you're developing for SETI are around these concepts. Who's the audience for them? Who are you looking to have play these games?
For me, obviously, it's not going to be your typical 7-year-old, but I'm looking for somebody, the audience is the person who is asking, how come it's taking you so long to find something? Somebody that's asking that question has given this some thought. So there's some sort of, there's a little bit more depth to the type of audience that would play that kind of game. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
My game concept much simpler, and I'm just thinking of get something out there into the marketplace, learn how to run the marketplace, maybe charge 99 cents for it, and learn how to do this, and then build upon it, and come up with maybe more mature ideas, and that could maybe fit into funding, maybe not. But in the end result, the more exposure we get for SETI, the more exposure we get, the name out there in the media, the more money that may come in for funding future SETI efforts.
All right, so unless someone else has the other mic, go ahead.
Me?
Oh.
Okay. Hello. So the actually Angry Birds was mentioned, and I thought one of the great things about that, and maybe some of the even like AAA titles on game consoles and computers, what I found really interesting in the the past couple of years is and from an educational angle on getting kids interested in maybe more scientific things. I thought physics, including physics in there, and that really wowed me because you get something that's interesting and that you you want to accomplish in a that's not just destroying things. And I think you've probably heard of the game Portal from Valve, that where you use physics to solve puzzles. And I thought something like that really can spark the imagination of kids to want to not only learn the concepts of physics, how they interact, and but learn how to use them to solve problems. Obviously, something like that goes beyond not just learning science and being interested in that, but how does problem solving, thinking, and there's a lot of wide benefits on that. Probably timely is that one of the designers of Portal, lead designer Kim Swift, just 3 days ago, she released her new game called Quantum Conundrum, where you have a world, it tells a story, so it's an entertainment game, and it's telling a story, and you get through it by solving puzzles. But the mechanics is that you can switch between 4 dimensions in the world. So it looks similar, but you switch from one where it looks normal, you can switch to one where it looks almost like fluffy, like a plush universe. And the different dimensions, one is things that are 10 times heavier. And another one, things that are 10 times lighter. Another one, time moves the 20th of our time. In another dimension, gravity works backwards. And you have to switch between them to solve the puzzle.
Oh.
So just a quick example that I saw a video of, this is only using two of them, is that you have this doorway that has lasers going across, and they'll fry you if you go through there. But you have this safe, like a safe with a dial, that's obviously heavy and it's strong and impregnable, but you can't pick it up. But what you do is you switch to the fluffy world, and it's very light, and you throw it at the lasers. But then the lasers just shred it instantly. So what happens is what you learn is you pick it up, you throw it, and before it hits the lasers, you switch to the heavy world dimension. It falls right on the lasers, and the lasers are not going through, and now you have a path to walk through and to get to beyond the level. And I thought that was really interesting and probably of interest to people in this room.
What was the name of that one?
It's Quantum Conundrum.
Okay.
By
I'll look that up.
Kim Swift.
We have time for one quick question.
All right, so I know we're giving you sort of a lot of things to play with, but going back to sort of these first steps in this first game that's in development here, possibly the introduction of the time element for signals that, from civilizations that aren't just staying there forever, but that these civilizations have lifetimes.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. As the game goes on, that's also built in there. You may have your collection of contacts, which would be displayed on a side panel. You can pull out, I've contacted these civilizations, and I've given them these technologies, they've given me this. And if you want to contact them again, for whatever reason, you will find at some point that they're no longer there. Also, you could keep trying another civilization that you have not been able to contact or get a hold of, and find that all of a sudden they have developed the capability to communicate with you.
All right, and we are out of time. Please thank our panelists one last time. And this is the end of SETICon 2. We hope you enjoyed yourselves and look forward to seeing you at SETICon 3, whenever that may be.
Good job.
Great.